Bermuda. I believe we are now live. Welcome back to Nurturing Our Nation Imperfect Parenting series. Today we are going to be joined by another amazing panel to discuss a big topic in parenting, which is boundaries. The focus is going to be on five topics. We're going to talk about establishing boundaries, maintaining boundaries, respecting children's personal boundaries, co parenting and boundaries, and another big one, social media and boundaries. So, for all parents, guardians, family, and friends, and the community at large who are joining us live, please feel free to ask questions and leave comments. Be sure to share it with your village as well so that they can catch the replay. It's going to be on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and CITV. At this time, I'm going to welcome the Honorable Tanae Farbit, Minister of Social Development and Seniors, to welcome us to this episode.
Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon, Bermuda. I am excited to be here for another panel discussion with some phenomenal and immensely resourceful women. Boundaries are often a big topic because it requires accountability and action. However, with consistency, the reward of establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries is priceless. And in case you missed the first discussion, we talked about the importance of routines and shared tips on how to create them. And you can watch that on social media, our social media channels, and make sure that you share it with our community. Today, I know that a wealth of information will be shared, and I want to thank our panelists and teams that have helped to make this series happen. Now, let's get to this discussion and welcome our panelists online. We have Dr. Terry Lynn Tyrrell, who is the coordinator at the Child Development Program. We also have with us this afternoon Dr. Sharon Apopa, family counselor at the Child Development Program. We also have Kristen Simmons, case manager and program facilitator at the Coalition for the Protection of Children, and Danae Burchell, program coordinator at the Coalition for the Protection of Children. And also, we have with us Gwendolyn Curry, infant and early childhood mental health consultant at Parent Guide Bermuda. So, welcome to our panelists, and now we can get started. I'm looking forward to hearing all the information that's going to be shared today.
We can't hear you, Alicia.
Thank you. A whole conversation later. But yeah, so thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's get right into it. So the first question is, what are boundaries?
I'll
I,
start.
I
Oh,
go ahead.
okay. So boundaries are basically limits that we create to keep us healthy and safe. And boundaries create awareness in children around what is acceptable and also what the expectations of their parents are, their family, and the community.
And I would just add to that that boundaries are for everyone, right? So not just the children in the family, but also the parents, maybe grandparents. So everyone needs to work within whatever the boundaries, the limits are for the family.
Okay.
And for those who may be new to setting boundaries or haven't successfully been able to set boundaries, what would you say are some good approaches to being able to set boundaries?
So I would say that I think one of the first things you have to deal with is be aware of your own family values and your own family rules, because that's going to be the initial guideline for helping you to set your boundaries. And then as well, taking into consideration the age of the person that you're setting the boundaries for. So that would be like one
Mm.
of the first two things I might consider when setting boundaries.
And I think just to piggyback off of that is to ensure, if we're talking about our children, ensure as parents that you passed on that education to your children, and also asking your children, what is their beliefs, no matter their age, what do they think, giving them some autonomy around those boundaries and that education.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think also we would be considering what tools do we need to give our children to be successful in operating within the confines of the boundaries that we're setting.
And I think being aware of their developmental stage. So,
Yeah.
depending on if they're a toddler, that boundary,
Mhm.
the explanation of that boundary might look different, or even the expectation for them to maintain the boundaries. So, I think it's important to communicate clearly, consistently, and repeat, because children need time to kind of learn. It also helps, similar to what was said earlier, to explain why, and also to have children talk about their feelings about the boundaries. They may
Yeah.
not agree with you, but it's helpful to have that discussion. And I think the other piece is that boundaries can change over time. Some boundaries are never going to change, but some may evolve depending on the child's age, or depending if it's a weeknight or a weekend, if it's a Christmas holiday, or it could be situational depending on the environment you're in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think one more thing to add is that when children push against boundaries, I think it's always an opportunity for learning. Sometimes they can learn to become solution focused by pushing against the boundaries, learning how to make restitution if they push against the boundaries and they harm someone else. So there's always an opportunity, even when the boundaries seem like they're being threatened, opportunities for learning and developing skill sets within the young person.
Mhm.
And for us, just adding Dr. Paper, and for us as parents, right?
Absolutely,
Exactly.
absolutely.
I was just going to add
sometimes
that
they sometimes they push back and you're like, well, I think you're
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
I was just going to add that parents need to be the model for the boundaries,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
yes, it's all well and good to set these limits and boundaries for your children, but if you're not operating within a set of boundaries, if you're not, and if they don't understand, um, you know, not only where the limit is for them, but where the limit is for you, then it's kind of counterproductive, because basically what you're trying to do is set children up to be successful as adults, right? So they need to see that model from you in terms of where your limits are, and that you are willing to sort of take the consequences if, for instance, you don't necessarily follow the boundary. One of those could be shouting at children, right? So I have a big thing about shouting or calling kids names or that kind of thing. For me, that's a boundary issue, right? They deserve respect just as you do as an adult. So you really can't demand from children what you yourself are not demanding of yourself.
Yeah.
I
You know,
think, sorry. Go
Right,
ahead,
and that
Dr.
brings up
Pitchen.
a whole nother concept, because sometimes we have to look at how our personal boundaries interface with cultural boundaries. And what do
Mhm.
we do when there's conflict between the two sets of boundaries? Yeah. You
Exactly.
know,
I think
Right.
also it's helpful to provide an opportunity for your child to practice how
yes.
to
Mhm.
maintain a boundary. So I know, with my daughter, I have given her examples of phrases she can use, no thank you, or please stop, or I don't like that. Also, we do a lot of coaching. We do
Mhm.
mirror talk, and we model. So if this happens to you, then what do you do? And then why? And we talk about it. And I found that to be
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
helpful.
Yeah. I think, as you mentioned earlier, repetition is important, right?
Yes.
So it's difficult to set boundaries sometimes within families. And sometimes you might set up a particular boundary or a limit, and then, oops, I forgot, right? And so, as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Terrell, making the restitution, understanding that, okay, even I didn't follow that boundary that we as a family set, and this is what is going to happen as a result.
Yeah.
And I think playing off of the cultural pieces as well, I think that as a culture, we might find it historically, we may have found it difficult
Hmm.
to apologize to our children or to admit a wrong to our children. And for whatever reason, whether we felt like they didn't deserve it or that it made us appear weak as parents, whatever the case may be, I think that now hopefully we've evolved a bit more in our parenting structure and mindset, in that understanding that no, that actually mirrors and models for children, skills that we want them to have at school and at camps and in different places where they are, where if they do harm someone or do violate
Mhm.
someone's boundary knowingly or unknowingly, that you apologize and you make restitution, and as a parent we can demonstrate that to them. If we do speak out of anger, yell, or say something we shouldn't say, once we have come to ourselves, come to our children, and say to them, you know what, I should not have spoken to you that way. I apologize.
Exactly.
And I think if anything, that builds respect versus them limiting
Exactly.
any type of respect
Mm,
for us.
exactly.
That's such a
So,
good point, and I think it builds responsibility and accountability.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add one piece. I think sometimes it's hard, especially if you are in a multi-generational household,
Yes.
for that
Yes.
apology. I know the first time my mom heard me apologizing to my daughter, she was like, what's going on here?" And so I had to have a conversation with my daughter about, different generational values and what
Mhm.
happened in the 70s and the 80s. Her mouth was wide open, couldn't believe it. But I think just, sharing that, we have to respect how
Mhm.
they grew up, but we're doing things a different way, and so, also don't test the limits too much with Nana, okay? Because
Mhm.
you might get a different response.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
mm,
And I think it's interesting. You're talking about respect, and I was thinking of other things that underpin boundary setting. And so I was thinking of consistency. I know
Mhm.
sometimes as
mm.
parents, we set the boundaries, and then some days we just actually get tired. Like the
exactly.
child's whining, but there's a very important that we stay consistent in our bondage that we
Mhm.
set, even when the days that we feel like giving up, or we have friends that saying you're too strict or you're too hard on your child because they
Mhm.
have a different set of boundaries in their family. But that consistency is really really important if we want the child to really adhere to the boundaries that we're setting.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And I think Dr. Popa kind of goes back to, I think I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, but for me, it sparks the whole idea of self-awareness, right? And what is it that what is it that I personally value?
Hmm.
And what is it that I want to value as a family? Like how
Mhm.
do, what are our family values? And I think that in and of itself speaks to, the ability to set boundaries. And just to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Tyrrell said, yes, there are generational differences,
Mhm.
and we need to not only respect what happened back then, but also help, maybe even bring along Nana to say,
Mhm.
you did it this way, but this is why I'm doing it this way,
Mhm. Mhm.
because this is the result I want in the end.
Yes.
Hmm.
I agree.
That was a lot of good information. That we touched on a bit in a few different ways the consistency with boundaries. So
Yes.
if you wanted to kind of like focus more on that, what would you say? How important is it to be consistent with boundaries?
I think children thrive off of consistency
In
and
general.
in general. And, going back to the panel discussion from last week, talking about routines,
Mm,
that's another thing that came up with
Hmm.
routines, is that they work better when they are consistently reinforced and consistently followed through with. The same thing goes with pretty much anything in a child's life that you want them to form a habit around or to form a construct around, is you have to reinforce it consistently.
mm,
And so, coming to boundaries in particular, as much as you can, being consistent around it. And that's what makes the apologies when something does not follow that much more important, because that's reinforcing that I do find this as something that's important. So I apologize that I did not this time stick to our particular agreement around this boundary. So
mm,
that helps to solidify for them, especially when they're little and they are, their whole idea of the world is being formed based off of their interactions. It's important to be consistent.
Yeah.
Yes, I also think that consistency helps the child to learn self-regulation,
Mhm.
because when we're consistently doing setting the boundaries, and the child after a while knows what to expect and knows how to handle their own emotions. And also I think that when we're consistent, then after a while the child can self-regulate.
Yeah.
So
As
Yeah.
well as it makes a predictable world. Children need predictability.
Yes.
We all need predictability. My
Yes.
gosh, I like to know what's happening today and
Yeah.
tomorrow. I have all my schedule.
Yes.
So it also helps to provide predictability for children when we have
Mm.
consistency of application of boundaries.
I
and
think
I
this, go
would go
ahead, Miss
ahead.
Berry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would piggyback on that, just the whole idea of self regulation. Children learn to self regulate based on the regulation of their adults.
Mhm.
And
That's right.
so if you're having a hard time, then, it's very difficult to expect that your child is going to be able to be calm if you're having a fit, right? If you're having a tantrum, when they have a tantrum, then it's hard to expect that they're going to be able to, regulate themselves as a result. So uh, so that kind of goes back to the whole issue from my perspective of self-awareness, right? What are my triggers? Why was it difficult for me to be consistent in this respect? And why am I expecting consistency from my little one and I'm not able to give consistency, right?
Mhm.
So all of those kinds of things I think need to be brought to the fore for parents to recognize that children can only regulate based on the adult's ability
To
to
regulate.
regulate.
Yes. I just wanted to add that I think it's important for children to experience what it means to cross a boundary and what the consequences are.
Mm,
And in doing so, you're modeling for them that there's accountability so that when they
mhm,
develop their own boundaries, they also understand accountability from others.
mhm,
And we want to keep them safe. So if we're saying this is the boundary in our house based on our values, then they start to understand and learn and use that own terminology. My child would say to me, I'm too tired for that activity today. Is that okay? And we have a conversation about it. And
mhm.
I think that's so important and very different from, the time when I was growing up. You didn't really have a choice. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
And
consistency piece is key.
yeah, I agree that, the consistency is important, but equally, like you just said, knowing that maybe today your child is just having a bad day, or they aren't meeting that boundary, and being able to have that conversation is very important. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and just going back to the cultural piece, when I grew up in Bermuda, it almost felt like adults expected respect from children, but didn't necessarily give respect to
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
Do as I say.
Because I said
Children are
so.
to be seen and not heard, and do as I say, but I'm not necessarily doing what I'm telling you to do, right? So
Mhm.
all of that I think factors in, and I think the more that we recognize that some of our cultural habits, I'm going to call them,
Mhm.
were not necessarily helpful then, and are not
Mhm.
are even less helpful now. So
Mhm.
I just want to add that piece to it.
Thank you. So, for those parents, caregivers, cousins, friends, aunties who are listening, what are some age appropriate boundaries that they can go ahead and implement with their children and themselves, perhaps?
Well, I think you need to consider not just age, but also developmental age, right? Like, what so for instance, you wouldn't necessarily give a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old something that you would give a 2-year-old, or you wouldn't give a 2-year-old something you would give a 4-year-old. So you need to consider what they are capable of, and what they are capable of, not only based on their age, but based on their developmental level.
Yeah, I
I,
think
I,
that's a really good point. And I think in terms of infants, just understanding they love to explore. So you want to keep them safe. So it's baby proofing to decrease the risk, providing a safe space where they can explore that's set up with, age appropriate and safe materials and resources, and then redirecting when they do something that is unsafe. And also don't overact because you don't want to scare them or startle them. They are
Mm,
infants. And then I would say for the toddler phase, routines are very important, as you discussed last week. Learning how to share, but also understanding that they're still brand new to the world, right? And so they're learning how to be independent. They're learning how to test the limits,
Mhm.
and they probably don't have the cognitive ability to remember all the rules, all the no's, all the don't do. So it may be, um, just repeating a lot, redirecting, and staying calm and limiting their choices, and just understanding that they're still young. Your job is to guide them, nurture them, protect them, keep them safe, and also providing attention for positive behavior. So telling them what you want, not telling them what you don't want, because
Yeah.
typically when you hear someone yelling, "Don't run," all the child hears is run. They do
Run.
not hear walk, which is what you want them to do, right? So tell them what you want. And I
Mhm.
would say preschoolers, at that stage, they can follow rules, but again, as Kristen said earlier, they might be tired, they may be hungry. So it really depends on what type of day they've had, where they're at. But trying to think about reasonable limits for that age group, supporting them in naming their emotions, how they're feeling for the day, like checking in, especially when you pick them up at the end of the day. How are you feeling before you start considering what you're going to do next? And I also find for that age group, using a timer is very helpful.
Mhm.
I think another boundary, which it might be a hot topic, but it's across the ages, is teaching boundaries around creating your personal space
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
creating your bubble. And really that works. I can remember my grandson, even when I'll be changing his pamper, he was like 4 or 5 months, and I'll be explaining to him, Nana's getting ready to open your pamper. I'm gonna because I think that is really important from birth, especially in our corner, that we learn to help people to create that personal space.
Mhm. Yeah.
What's
Mhm.
appropriate and inappropriate in terms of touch and things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
And we facilitate a program called Safety Matters at the primary and middle school age. So being able to teach children about what does it mean to be in a dangerous situation?
Hmm.
Who is that safe person for me to communicate that I'm in a dangerous situation? Also, equally important is knowing your, like you said, personal space, but your private body parts.
Right.
At a younger age, we tell them, your private body parts are where your bathing suit covers.
Right. Right.
I also think it's very important, and I practice this in my own parenting, is naming your body parts accurately.
Yes.
Exactly.
Penis, vagina, because you
Exactly.
don't want to call it your moo moo, and then
Ex-
your child's describing something's happening to this body part, and they don't
exactly.
And
know
people,
how to call it what it is. So
or people don't understand what it is what it is they're saying
exactly,
because of
yeah,
the language that they're using.
yeah,
I
and
agree, and I
also
do.
teaching. Sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, also teaching children that it's okay to say no, and
Absolutely.
Mhm.
knowing that they have the right to say no, and that
Mhm.
adults' responsibility is to keep them safe. Yes, they can do things to help adults to do that, but ultimately it's our role
Absolutely.
and
Exactly.
our
Job.
job to ensure that they know their own personal boundaries. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I grew up in a Bermuda where it was important to kiss, hug,
Mm.
and enter the personal space of elders and allow them to enter your personal space, regardless
Mhm.
of how you might be feeling about it at the time. So being willing and able, again, culturally, to allow children to say, if they need to say hello to, great aunt so and so, it doesn't have to be that they have to be right up into great aunt's face, even though she might have liked that or something. But rather giving them opportunities, giving them tools to be able to, as you said, say no, but also alternative ways of greeting someone without
Yeah.
necessarily offending either person, right? So, and I
And I
think that is very important as well.
Yeah. I was going to say too, as a kind of attention to that, us as parents being very aware and connected with our children so that we
Mhm.
can read their energy and their responses to the people around them and see when they have reached their own personal boundary, maybe even before they're able to communicate that to us. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
we might have a toddler or small child who doesn't have the words to say, I don't feel comfortable with this person, or I don't want to hug them. But us as parents, seeing like, okay, he's pulling back, he's maybe not wanting to,
Mhm.
engage this person with a hug, or whatever the case may be, and that's
Body
okay.
language.
And that's okay, yeah. So my toddler, for example, if she encounters a cousin or someone that I'm really friendly with and might reach in and give them a hug, I can tell her to say hi to that person. But if she is not feeling like giving that person a hug, I can respect that, as that being her boundary in that moment, and being okay with that, and not trying to force them. Because the other part of that is that if we force our children to cross what
Mm-hmm.
they're comfortable with, then they get used to not respecting how their body feels in those
Exactly.
moments of being uncomfortable. And then, when a dangerous situation presents, there are triggers within their body of what is safe and what's comfortable and what's okay has already been skewed. And I think that that's an important thing to respect right out of the gate, with small children, so that as they get older, you can continue the conversation of, what is your gut telling you, or what is your intuition telling you about, engaging with this person, and what that boundary might look like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it's also important to give parents the language and
Mm-hmm.
the permission to be able to say to the relative or whoever, I'm sorry, but it's my child doesn't feel comfortable, or can you give, because parents, I mean, culturally, we've been taught to respect our elders. And so sometimes parents are cueing into what their child is communicating nonverbally, but the parent doesn't have the language or the
Yeah.
skills to say to granny or somebody else, no, not a kiss or a hug today. So
Yes.
we have to also equip parents to be
Yeah.
able to be more protective of their children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would just add, I also think that when someone has crossed a boundary with your child, it's important to notify them in front of your child so
Yeah.
that it's very transparent.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be rude or disrespectful, neutral, calm voice, but just saying, my child is a minor. We don't do that here. Or, I don't like what you did. We don't do that in our household. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I think that that reinforces for the child that you are a safe adult, because you are respecting their boundary and speaking up for them. And that's
Yes.
something that
Mhm.
again comes up in the safety matters curriculum, is helping children identify who their safe adults are,
Right.
the adults that are going to listen to them, that are going to respect their feelings, and are going to take action on their behalf to help them to feel safe and to be safe. So if you are speaking up for your child in front of your child to the person, I think that that does nothing but reinforce to them, like, okay, mommy is a safe, is my safe person, or aunt, or whoever you are to that child in that moment.
Mhm. Mhm. Exactly.
Okay, so I know this is also another big one when it comes down to co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
How do, or I guess, what would be the guidance that you would give for establishing relationships when co-parenting?
So, and I was thinking about this question. I think one of the major boundaries to set is to determine as parents that we will not engage our child in our conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So, I mean, because a lot of
Mhm.
parents, they make the child the messenger, the child is in the middle. So, setting that boundary that the child will not be involved in any parental
Mm-hmm.
conflict is a major one at the outset. And then agreeing to focus only on matters of the child when you come
Mm-hmm.
together, nothing about your past history or your intimate,
Mm-hmm.
nothing, just staying
Mhm.
focused again on the child. And then this last one, then I'll just stop talking, is determine what methods of communication. I mean, recently we've been doing a lot of co-parenting, and there are some parents that really are not in a space to have verbal contact. So are you going to use different apps, or are you going to use a communication
Mhm.
book? What type of communication pattern would be most comfortable for us to communicate through when we're doing our issues of co-parenting? So that's just
Mhm.
three things I'd like to throw out there.
Yeah.
I
And
would
I
just
would just
add one
add,
thing.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, be mindful of talking about the other parent to your child.
Yes,
Mm.
that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And and just added to that, keep your personal life personal, right? So just
Hmm.
and I think that kind of dovetails with what Dr. Popo was saying, that whatever's going on in your life, it's now your personal life, and it has nothing to do with the parent, the other parent of your child. And so just to
Yeah.
keep those things, and on the same token, don't be sort of again dovetailing with what Dr. Popa says. Don't be using your child to inquire about the other parent's personal life,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one little tip they gave us in this training that I did, they said that each parent should get a photo of the child. And then every time you're having your interactions, you have your photo of the child right there. So when
Mhm.
you're tending to go astray, that photograph refocuses you on the real purpose why the two of you are interacting
Mhm.
anyway. So
Mhm.
it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
just a little trigger. It's like, okay, let's get back on what we're really here about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, of course, best case scenario, every conversation's peaches and cream and everything goes along. But in there's more contentious moments, being able to say to the co-parent, um, I need to just sit on this and think and come away from the
Hmm.
conversation for a bit because it's gotten a bit hot.
Mm-hmm.
And being able for that other co-parent to receive that and also have that tool as well when they're in,
Mm-hmm.
they're
Hmm.
feeling angry or frustrated with the other person because having two parents who think that they have what's, best interest of the child knocking heads, it's never going to be fruitful, right?
Exactly.
So
Right.
being
Well,
able to respect how the other person
right. And I think to just piggybacking on that, to keep it in mind that we all learn to parent by how we were parented. And
yeah.
so all of us we're all coming to parenting with our own different ideas. And so, just as you said, yes, we might both have the best interest of the child in mind, but what I think is best and what you think is best, even though they're both best, we can't agree on it, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
just keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I was going to say, too, picking your battles in a co
Mm,
parenting relationship
Yes.
is a really big one. Not every issue has to be a big issue. And I think that, we're all human and we all have, tons of emotions involved in our interactions with one another. And when we're talking about potentially a relationship that did not work out and is now dissolved, and we still have to co-parent and come together on some level, there can be a lot of emotions that get in the way. And then some people, depending on their personality, could want to drive their heels in and not,
Hmm.
be able to give a little and whatnot. But really, if we're looking at what's in the best interest of our children, being in constant conflict with their other parent is not what's in their best interest. If the other parent is not making a decision that's jeopardizing their health, their safety, their emotional and psychological well-being, then is this something that I have to go to war for, or is this something that I can let go and save this battle for something that really is important and really is going to impact my child? Because if you're constantly fighting over every single thing, when it comes to a bigger issue, you're not going to be heard because that person already feels like every time they come to you, it's going to be a fight. Yeah, and we
mhm,
talked about last week, right, Alicia, taking the ego out of parenting and
mhm,
really
mhm,
checking in with yourself and saying, is this something that I can be flexible with? Or am I holding fast to this because of, like you said, the parenting style of former generations or my own stuff or what I'm going through, in my other
mhm,
relationships? Or is this something that is really like child center and child focused and I really
mhm.
can't move on it? So that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
I think it underscores the whole notion of respect, right? Being willing and able to respect yourself, one, and respect the other parent as a human being who deserves respect. And so part of being respectful is being willing to listen, being willing to understand, being willing to compromise. And so sometimes the issues that co-parents face, the conflicts that they face, is based on the fact that they're not willing to compromise. And sometimes, it's a non-negotiable, but being willing to communicate the why that's non-negotiable,
yes.
Yeah.
so
And
that
for
so
some,
that people can come to a consensus.
yeah, I mean, and for some parents, I think that even though they have the greatest intentions of coming to the table respectfully and things like that, it's a matter of not really being self-aware of their pain point.
Mhm.
And so, no matter what the greatest intentions, if you have not sometimes dealt with your pain point, no matter how much you want to come to the table, maybe it's premature to even attempt to
Mm-hmm.
do co-parenting when that point of pain is so severe. And
Yeah.
it might have to
Mm-hmm.
be dealt with before you can even start the co-parenting process. So, in some sense, in some occasions, you may have to start out with the parallel parenting, get healed, and then transition to the co-parenting. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that, I want parents who are listening to know that it's not co-parenting is not a panacea for everybody. Sometimes there are criteria that need to be met before you can actually co-parent, and it's okay if you're not there yet to start where you are and then have that as maybe a point to work towards.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add with that then that you might need to consider a very detailed parenting plan, right? That some we might have to put pen to paper and sit down and say, okay, what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there, who's going to do this, how is this going to happen, and the more detail I one of the things that I know is that the higher the conflict between persons, the more detail needs to be in a parenting plan,
Mhm,
right? So
mhm,
so that everybody knows what their limits are, what their boundaries are, what the expectations are, and what the consequences are should those boundaries be crossed or those limits
mhm.
not be adhered to.
And just for some parents that may not be able to get on the same page regarding boundaries, can you touch on like how will that impact the child?
Children love consistency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
I
think,
Not
think it's
only
confusing. It can be very
yes,
confusing,
it,
yeah.
especially
it,
to little ones. We're
it's
doing this
very
over here,
confusing,
we're doing this over here. It's
right?
confusing and it's not in the best interest.
Exactly. And not only that, I think we need to remember that children come together from two people, right? So
Yes.
they love both
Yep.
parties, right? And they see themselves as being a part. In fact, they are a part of both parties. So um, you know, it has an impact on their own self-esteem, their self-worth, their self-image, their self everything, right? Because, I'm a part of mommy and daddy hates mommy and mommy hates daddy. So therefore, I'm not likable, I'm not lovable, right? So they come to really negative conclusions about who they are as a human being if their parents, cannot get along with each other.
Yeah, and it actually has a rippling effect on many other spheres of their life, even in the education arena. I can tell you how many young people, the problem is co-parenting is not working well. There's no communication, so somebody forgets to send the PE clothes, and then the teacher holds the child accountable who's only 5 for not having their PE clothes, and they sat on the bench, and so it really has a ripple effect on them socially, emotionally, every sphere of their life
Mhm,
when the parents can come together. So
mhm,
it's really very, very important that, co-parenting or parallel parenting is sorted out as quickly as can.
mhm,
I think it's important for parents to understand children don't need to be thinking about adult issues. We
Problems.
got
mhm,
across the spectrum. Children need to be
Yes.
children. They need to be able to go to nursery, daycare, school, thinking about going to see their friends or their work activities.
mhm,
Not does mommy get along with daddy? Does daddy get along with
Mm-hmm.
mommy? And so on and so forth.
mhm,
And I think that children being exposed to conflict, it disrupts their biological things as well. So when we think about being exposed to conflict and stressful events, that raises your stress hormones. That means that you're dysregulated. So you're going into school and you're already dysregulated. Your body's already full of adrenaline. And so it is going to be difficult to sit and learn and absorb and take in and enjoy yourself if you have those kinds of stress chemicals raging
mhm,
through your body. And then if you think about if this is something that is happening ongoing, like not just this one time, but if your parents are constantly arguing and fighting, and you are witness and to that, you're absorbing all of that tension, and then we're expecting you, the rest of the community and society, to go on and be a happy, healthy child. And that's
Mhm.
not a reasonable expectation when you are constantly feeling stressed about the people that
Mhm.
should be making you feel the happiest, the safest, and the most comfortable. So I think that's, again, taking the ego out of it. Sometimes as parents, we get so absorbed in our heart and our feelings and all of that. So hopefully this can reframe for some people that the impact on your child is not just, okay, he's crying in the corner because we're arguing, he'll get over it. Right. That those kinds of
Mhm.
things have lasting impacts on them far beyond, I
Mhm.
think, what we might expect.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think
Uh,
just for an aha moment, when I was running the Children's Psychiatric Hospital, my youngest child with suicide ideation was 6 years old, and he took a big carving knife to school in his book bag, intending to kill himself. And luckily, a little child saw it in his book bag. But when we interviewed him at Child and Adolescent Services, he said, "My parents argue, argue, argue. I hear my name being called all the time. And I thought maybe if I was there, my parents would be happy." So
mhm.
it affects them, their
It-
health, their mental
The
health. Like,
mental health,
and people
exactly.
would think, why does a 6-year-old need to be stressed out? The impacts
Yeah.
of co-parenting.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Birchall was saying, yes, there is this dump. And I would just say that it's impossible to learn. It's impossible to really function when you have that hormonal dump consistently in your body, right? So the teacher is expecting you to sit down and behave or whatever the teacher is expecting you to do, but it's impossible to do that because your body, your brain is actually functioning in the lower, the lower brainstem, and you're the cortex is not able to function.
Yeah.
So no, I can't, and it's just impossible. And just sort of again emphasizing what Dr. Apopa says. So therefore, because I can't, my mental health, my physical health, my every part of my well-being is compromised because because of this situation that I find myself in.
And children are excellent observers but poor interpreters. So
Mhm.
they can be in a situation and they can see everything that's going on, and they can pick up on the nuances and I hear my name being called all the time in that
Hmm.
particular scenario. But their ability to interpret
Hmm.
is,
Mhm.
that's a more mature, higher brain function
Exactly.
thing that we
Mhm.
develop as we get older. So for
Mhm.
a small child, it might just be, well, if I eliminate myself from the
Hmm.
situation, then it'll be over. Not being able to interpret the fact that there are much higher level adult
Exactly.
things going on
Mhm.
that really don't have much to do with me, but my name's being called. So we as adults have to protect as much as we can our children's mental health and their emotional development,
Mhm.
because they can observe a whole lot and they learn a lot from their observations, but they aren't great at interpreting that information, particularly when it's higher level adult stuff that's going on. Definitely.
Thank you. And I'm gonna go kind of streamline into a specific area of boundaries. We are in 2022. We post pandemic. We've had a lot of screen time. Everything is super super digital. So regarding screen time, what would you say is like appropriate for various age groups, like birth, preschool, primary,
Yeah.
and so forth?
Can I quote the American Academy of Pediatricians? The American Academy of Pediatricians advises that children under 2 should have no screen time, and children over 2, 1 or 2 hours a day. And I know that that doesn't necessarily happen, but that's their recommendation.
I agree with that. I would just say the exception for under 18 months would be if you're doing screen use for videoing a parent that's, away from the child. And I think we should definitely be setting limits for children. After being in the pandemic, it may be harder to wean them off of a screen. Screens are here to stay for the most part. And I think
Mhm.
it's important for toddler use to be present when they're using their screens. Sometimes there's adult information that comes on, whether it's an ad or someone just kind of hacking into a program. So making sure that you at least can hear what's going on if a toddler is looking at it. I would say reviewing any apps or games prior to the child using it. Making sure that when a child is watching a movie versus a show. So like a movie has it has a long storyline. There's usually time enough for like a conclusion about empathy and morals and ethics. But the shows, you get like 1 minute of the conclusion. And so usually those children take away all the bad stuff that happens. So like just being mindful of that, like what are they taking away? And making sure that there's some sort of educational component to what they're viewing.
Mm. I would just add, though, that because one of the things that we know for sure is that children learn really in the context of relationship, right? They don't learn from screens. And so sometimes, parents delude themselves into thinking, well, I'm showing my child, another language, or I'm showing my child their ABCs and one, two, threes on the screen, but really they're not learning anything from the screen unless the adult is there to sort of interpret what is happening. So I personally would just, caution parents with screens in terms of not allowing children to really watch those screens unless you're there to kind of monitor what they're watching and also help to interpret what they're watching.
So, how would you say would be good ways to implement boundaries around screen time?
Well, I think that, particularly when you have children who do tend to view more independently, so the older children who might have their own device or have their um, own kind of access to it, is putting limits around things that have to be done before they can engage in that tablet or that game or whatever the case may be. In my house, we have a have you done this, and this
Mm.
before you're able to then have some time on your tablet, and making that a thing, because even as adults, right, there are certain things we have to do before we get to do the things that we want to do, and we pay the consequence if we reverse that and do the things we want to do before we do the things we have to do. So if we're looking at the long term, what we're trying to teach our children, it's putting those things in place that, okay, these are the things that have to be taken care of before you get to do the things that are more on your own free time. And that is not even just for tablets, that goes for any kind of leisure time that they may have. Before you go outside to play, have unpacked your lunchbox, done your homework, that those kinds of limits and boundaries and routines, it crosses over into.
And I think also, I have a 14-year-old, so we're linked on our iPhone. So she has a cell phone, and I can see her activity throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. And I can say to her, I see you spend a lot of time on social media and messaging. You need to bring that down a bit. And if you can't bring that down a bit, I can block you. Not to be
Also,
a parent, but setting
yeah,
those limits and having those conversations with the older children.
yes, and also I think setting boundaries around time and place.
Yes.
Can't use the screen before bedtime, at least 30 minutes before, because then you'll just be
Mm.
up for the rest of the night. Also, no, we don't do screens at the dinner table anymore because it just got to the point where no one was talking to each other. I'm on the screen, my daughter's on the screen. I was like, no, this is not working for us. So you can have some boundaries around time and place, and preferably no screens in the bedroom, right
Yeah.
before.
And I think that
So,
when we talk about flexibility around boundaries, I think that this is one that can have some flex in it. So, for example, during the summer, when there is a bit of a break from what might be our traditional routines and the academic demands, my son, who's in primary six, he had more access to his tablet with some still existing boundaries in place. but you are able to make those adjustments as your family adjusts to the different schedules and things that are going on. I had to tell him to put the tablet down because he was trying to do everything with this tablet in his hand. Everything. I mean, put shoes on, brushing his teeth. I'm like, okay, put it down. So that, yes, put it down and pause it so that you can do things properly and I don't have to call you back to do them. And then you are, you have your time that you can go onto that. The other thing I would say too is that sometimes our children, if they feel that we are too punitive, the older ones in particular, if they feel that we are too punitive around their technology usage, they can get secretive around it, and that's not something that we want them to do either. So we've had children who would say, well, no, I didn't tell my mom that this person sent me an inappropriate message online because she was going to take the whole phone or take the whole tablet away from me and I wouldn't have it. So I think as parents on the other side, we have to strike a balance in how we communicate around and mitigate the use of the technology so that our children don't feel like they have to keep the bad stuff that they might encounter away from us so that they don't lose the privilege of having it.
And I think that goes around. We talked about it last week. Is having choices. So yes, this is the boundary. The boundary is that you're wearing a raincoat today, but would you like it to be a red raincoat or would you like it to be a green raincoat? And of course, as they get older, more complex choices. But always having a little bit of choice so that they can have that buy-in into the boundary. So.
Exactly. I completely agree. So really the boundary is sort of the container in which you can be free, right?
Yeah.
So that is really, really important as well.
One
And I
tip
think,
that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, my mind was just kind of piggybacking on what Ms. Simmons and Ms. Birchall was saying, and that is, setting up the protections for the social media, right?
Parental
What what
controls.
what are the and probably include the child, especially. I don't think it necessarily include the child in the boundary setting, so that everybody is in agreement with what these boundaries are, and so when they are crossed, everybody is in agreement with what the consequences are.
I agree.
I was just going to say too that one of the negative impacts of screen time during COVID has been vision issues with children. And one of the tips that the ophthalmologist provided was taking breaks. So, if it's a very young child, make them get up every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes. If it's an older child, you adjust accordingly, but also making sure that the screen is like not right up to their eyes. She said it should be at least the distance from your forearm to your hand so that it doesn't impact their vision.
Mm. They also have special screens that you can put over the at least a laptop or a computer to kind of also assist with protecting the eyes in that respect.
And I think earlier we were touching on like social cues or kind of looking deep into what might be transpiring. So I know with my son, he's 11, and sometimes he just wants these screens to kind of clear his mind. He's like, I'm kind of just tired. It's just like I have to get up, we gotta get ready, we gotta go to school, we come here. It's just like I just want to clear my mind. And like you said, like looking at it before bed, so now you're kind of like psych yourself up, and then now you can't rest properly. So like introducing as a healthy boundary, like if you're feeling exhausted, maybe these are some days that you can pick yourself up. That's not necessarily on a screen. Um,
Mhm.
the generation like, oh my, you don't play marbles, you don't go outside, you don't. And it's nobody outside, right? So just kind of
But
like, if you can do it, or
I,
like making it fun for them so that they can still
yeah.
have some sort of outlet.
I mean, I think that we need to encourage them to do those kinds of things, right? So maybe we adults need to teach them how to play
Do them,
marbles.
yes. I would
Maybe
do
we
marbles,
maybe we
definitely.
adults need to teach them how to, walk outside for a bit, those kinds of things, so that they have that in their repertoire of something else that they can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well that while we know that it's screen time and all that's here to stay. We also there is also the concern of the addictive properties of especially gaming. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I've been working with the gaming commission, and we're looking at the amount of children who are addicted and the research around addiction to gaming as a part of their screen time. So even while it has a lot of positives, it's really important, as you've all said, that we monitor it because it can become extremely addictive. And there are instances where, you try to take these children's iPads or whatever way, and they become very abusive and very violent
Yeah.
because because they have become so they believe they can't live without this
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
piece of equipment that's already started to rewire their brain in a way that they are very dependent on it. So we do have to look at, and that's very challenging for parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
And even a
it's
financial aspect of it, where a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them are like spending the money, like the Christmas or birthday money, to get like V-Bucks or different things, or no, my mama's PayPal, and
and
it can become
stolen
this like
cards, yes.
financial gambling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one child did $10,000 worth of
Oh.
gaming on his mama on his granny's credit card. $10,000 worth of gaming,
Yeah.
and the parents had to pay it back. I mean, it was,
Yeah,
of
that's
course, everybody
something.
was distressed. Of course, the
Right.
family
It's
came
not
in
very fun.
Shopping.
$10,000 because, and he had stolen
I
granny's credit card.
I would
Um,
encourage I would encourage parents to try and introduce a family night, a games night.
Mm-hmm.
yes.
You got Candyland, Suspend.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these kinds of games, and even if it's just 30 minutes, the children get so tickled. They're learning good social skills, how to take
Hmm.
turns, how to lose with dignity and grace, all of those things, and it can be very fun, even when you're doing it across generations,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I would try to introduce that
Yeah, I agree.
just to give a difference to the screen time. You get a different feeling from it.
And it
And
may
those
be
type of
some pushback with the teens. I know my daughter, when I try to do stuff like that, she says, "Well, not in the olden days. You, me," she says to me, "You grew up in the olden days." I'm like, "Look in the 90s."
5 minutes ago, right?
But they got that pushback. But again, being consistent and saying, "No, this is what we're
Mhm.
gonna do tonight. I really just want to spend time with you."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important that parents remember that they are parents. Like, because I think sometimes parents seem to think that if my child does not agree with what it is I'm asking or
Mm-hmm.
asking them to do, then somehow I'm a bad parent. But no, you're the parent for a reason, right? And children's job is to, push back. That's
Mm-hmm.
their job. And
Mm-hmm.
your job is to hold firm, right?
Yeah.
So really giving parents permission to remember that they are the parent,
Yes.
and that if they've set the rule, the limit, the consequence, that you know the expectation is that you follow that rule,
Mm-hmm.
limit, or consequence.
I had that exact conversation with my 10-year-old the other day. I was like, it's my job as your parent to make sure that you've brushed your teeth and bathed yourself. And so, the
Mhm.
pushback or the attitude, it means I'm doing my job. That's what a parent is. I just
Exactly.
let you not brush your teeth and not bathe and not do all the things that you have to do. I would not be doing my job properly. So,
Parents
Exactly.
need to
and I
say, I'm
think
not one of
having
your
that,
little friends.
yeah, like having that level
Exactly.
of conversation with them that isn't necessarily pushing like the I'm the authority, and we are
Mm.
the authority, but not doing it in that way, but doing it in the sense that at my role as your parent is to do these certain things. Some of them you might not like, but I have to do it, otherwise I'm not doing
Mm.
my job appropriately.
Exactly. You're being the benevolent,
Yeah.
authoritative parent, right? You're still the authoritative parent, but you're
Yes.
benevolent. Um, you
Yes.
know, I used to tell my children, I'm not your friend.
Yeah.
I'm just not your friend. I can be friendly, but
Yes.
I'm not your friend.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we touched on play, because these are still children that we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
would you say that it's possible that children can learn boundaries through play?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, I think, just sort of again touching on what Dr. Joel said, that it's, and I think Sherilyn as well, Chrislyn rather, it's really important to kind of build in those times in your family life where you do, play, where you do have that board game, where you do have that nature walk, where you do, do something that is fun, that is playful. Uh, you know, as I said again, you're the parent, so it's okay as the parent to be playful. You're
Mm-hmm.
just not the play friend, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think by doing that, you also create teachable moments. So
Exactly.
there have been some really great conversations that parents have with their children just by engaging them in a walk or playing these games. And you find ways that you might be able to correct some
Mm-hmm.
misconceptions they have about the world, or, you find ways to make everyday life a lesson for them. So in
Mm-hmm.
my house, if something comes on the news that I think is relevant to my son, I pull him in and I'm like, did you see what happened in that situation? How do you think that person could have reacted differently, or what do you think would have been different? What do you think you would have done? And then that builds in your ability to see where they might need some extra guidance, or where you might need to beef up some of your reinforcement as a parent.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think play is a great time for practicing boundaries or even learning about what has happened to your child that day or the week.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes
The,
some children they just don't open up for a couple of days, and it's through play. You'll say, "Why are you playing like that?" Or, "Tell me about your day," and you will learn a lot more than, in your first 5 minutes. How was your day? Fine,
exactly. The
good.
play. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That's
No, I was just saying that the play can be a window into my life, right? So how
Yes.
I'm playing might give you some indication of how I'm feeling. The minister made a comment here that I think is important. And on this, we're all women here talking about parenting, but the other parent usually is a male, right? And so it's important that we allow men to play with their children the way they see fit, right? And sometimes men will play with their children a little bit more roughly than mom might have, the ability to tolerate. But that too is okay. Like it's okay
Yes.
if I'm roughhousing, or it's okay if I'm shadow boxing, or it's
Mhm.
okay if I throw the kid up and catch them, even though
It's
you
okay if the
you
child is. It's okay if the child is okay with
okay,
it.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
Absolutely.
but I'm saying that
especially tickling.
Yeah.
sometimes mom wants to dictate to dad, how
Yeah.
how the play should happen.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is that, dad is the parent too, and he has the
Yeah.
opportunity, he should have the
Yes,
opportunity to play the way that he wants to play with his
yes,
child within the boundaries of that child
Safety.
being happy with it.
Yes.
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah. That's true. And I even my son when he was little, I remember he was, a rough little boy, and he's like, "Come on, mommy, let's fight." And and I'm like, "I don't want to fight. Like, let's sit down and cuddle and read a book." But that's where dad came
Yeah.
in and was
Mhm,
able to play fight. He felt much more comfortable playing with him in that
mhm,
way.
mhm.
Whereas mommy wants to do more of the softer, gentler types of playing, but understanding
Mhm.
that there are children who require that rough house
Yes,
or that type of play just based on their own sensory needs, like
that's
that
right.
is something that they would benefit from. So in
Yes.
those moments, if it felt like it was getting too rough for me to even watch, I would excuse myself. Like somebody's gonna get hurt. I can't watch it. But there's a place for that, that I
Mhm.
think we can honor in our parenting relationship too.
Exactly. And I think sometimes, we miss uh, I don't know if interpret's really the word, but usually dads, if they're roughhousing with the children, they have a sense of, when where the limit is, right?
Yes, yes.
And so just as they are the parent, they can read the child as
Mhm,
well,
mhm,
and they will know, they might push the boundary a little bit more than mom, but
mhm.
still they know, okay, my kid can't, and will dress back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Young children definitely can benefit from different types of play. It can feed just like what Ms. Burchell said earlier about the sensory system. You know, your vestibular senses, your proprioceptive senses. Some like my child, she needs pillow. She wants a pillow fight every morning. I might do it 3 times a week, not every morning, but she needs it. Like
Mhm.
that's what gets her up and going. So different children have different needs, and
Mhm.
hey, great for them for going for it.
Yeah, I also think when we talk about boundaries and play, like role play, it
Mhm.
definitely helps children to learn boundaries. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my son right now is into everything. He's 3, but he likes to like cut the grass with a fake lawnmower. He likes to get the scissors for the trees. But he knows that, you know, I can't put my hand under a real lawnmower because his experience playing with one. So now, you know, he'll say, I cut the grass with daddy, but I stood back, but I cut the grass
Mhm.
with daddy. So he knows those things. Even when he had like the model kitchen, he learned that I can't touch the stove because we taught him that, you know, I know it's not hot now, but mommy's the real stove. It's really hot and you're gonna burn your fingers. So there's role play opportunities, and being able to do it with your child, you're enforcing
Mhm.
certain safety boundaries as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Children learn through play, so that the more
Yeah.
that you allow them to play and even you play with them, you know, a lot of the boundary setting that we want them to learn, they can learn through the play activity.
Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up with a question about, what happens if boundaries are not adhered to? What is a good line of action for parents regarding consequences? And as the series implies, we are imperfect parents, right? So let's say we've even kind of fell off. Like, how do we go about reestablishing boundaries as well?
Mhm.
I think lots of communication, having discussions, talking about it, allowing children to engage in the discussion. I try to provide a warning depending on, how I'm feeling. If I'm real tired, you may not get a warning, but try to provide a warning. Also, just keeping in mind the child's developmental stage.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not just their age, or also what kind of day that they've had. Did they really need to cross the boundary, or was it just a one-off? So
Mhm.
um, not just being flexible, but just kind of having some empathy for children and
Mhm.
just respecting them that they're a human being as well. And I would say if you're not going to set a consequence, at least have a discussion around, okay, you cross the boundary. Typically, I would do X, Y, and Z, but because I know you're tired, I'm not going to today. But the next time, it will be X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
So I would just say
Mhm.
lots and lots of communication.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And besides the communication, just being willing to say, as I think we've said already, apologize, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this has happened, and help the child and help use your empathy skills, or model for the child empathy. Okay, we all know what the rule is. Um, for some reason, it didn't happen today. Uh, what do we need to do to make it, better the next time? Sort of, I understand that you were tired. I understand, sort of using those ideas that maybe you can empathize with why the boundary was crossed at this particular time, and what are we going to do differently? Sort of the repair work, right?
I think
Also,
Um,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say, deciding what the consequence is going to be ahead of time and establishing
mhm,
that with your child so everyone's on the same page. And
mhm,
then just not having these consequences last a long time or be permanent.
mhm.
Yeah, I was just
Well,
gonna say that, you know, while we're talking about boundaries as parents, it's important to be flexible with your children. So just like you guys just said, you know, being able to identify, you know, this was that one-off time, or you didn't have a good day, or maybe you're just tired, and then being open and being able to have, you know, obviously developmentally appropriate conversations with your child, and knowing
mhm,
your child and knowing where your child is very important.
mhm. And I would just add to that, emphasizing it didn't work this time.
Mhm.
So, but what we have another chance the next time,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good
So,
one.
okay, this time it didn't happen, but we have another chance next time to make it happen.
And to talking about the behavior and the boundary and not the child. You know,
Absolutely.
that's a real that's a hard one sometimes, but it's really
Life
important.
Yeah.
or the
Mhm.
deed, not the doer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that in general, and it plays into this, helping children to name their feelings, how they are feeling, and their emotions goes a long way with all kinds of parenting, scenarios that you come up with. So having your child to identify, am I feeling tired? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling sad? So that then when they are in situations they can say, well, no, I'm feeling tired, so that let me go and sit down, or let me tell someone I'm feeling tired, so that that can also stave off some other negative behaviors or boundaries getting crossed, that we as parents might not foresee because we don't know how they are feeling.
Mhm.
That's a good one. And I think also figuring out a plan for yourself as a parent. Okay, what are you going to do? Like when the child expresses they have feelings about how they cross the boundary. I'm sad. I don't feel good, especially if you're really, really angry. Are you going to allow someone else to deal with it because you're really angry? Or are you going to like take a deep breath and say, I can't talk about this right now. I need a moment. Or, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like having a plan for yourself and thinking it through.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was so many gems, like so many gems. I love it. I'm glad. I hope that anyone that's tuned in live were able to absorb. But this is going to be out there forever, so feel free to come back, revisit. Pause, take notes, share it with other people who might not have been on today, so that they can get this awesome information. I'm gonna allow the minister to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you again, Alicia, and thank you again to the panelists. I was listening to, we were talking about planning just a little while ago, and I remember before I had my children, I did a birthing plan, and it's interesting. You do this birthing plan, and sometimes you're able to stick to it, sometimes you're not able to stick to it, but it's only for a period of your life. But then you have a lifetime where you're going to be a parent,
Yes.
and I didn't ever think of writing a parenting plan. Or so I want to know, who are you guys doing parenting plans? How about you?
Well, can we sign up for them?
Who sign up? I didn't sign up. But I've heard today about consistency, heard today about predictability, modeling, so that there's accountability. I've heard about making sure, this was key, making sure that you're not putting your children in the parental conflicts. Um, Dr. Terry Leanne mentioned something in regards to telling the children exactly what you want, because I think, Danae, you had mentioned about children's interpretations and how they interpret things. So we have to be very clear in the language that we use. And I find sometimes, even when we're communicating with children, it's too much language, and it can get the messaging can get lost in too much message, too much talk. So we have to be mindful of that as well, but also matching consequences to behavior. So whatever the behavior is or the action, making sure that the consequence is appropriate. I again thank you for that information. We will continue with this imperfect parenting series throughout the month of well, September is almost over, October and November. And again, like Alicia said, please visit government's Facebook page, Twitter page, YouTube page, to revisit this over and over and over again, because it's a lot of content that you might have to go back and replay and rewind, so that we are giving ourselves tools to be better parents. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
And like the minister said, we're going to continue the episodes straight through to November. So our next panel discussion is going to be on the effects of bullying and domestic violence with children. That will be October 20th at 12:30. That's also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so we're going to have some gems in that one dropped as well. But thank you to everyone tuned in, and be sure to share this with a friend. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Good
Bye.
afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good afternoon.